Hi, this is Jim, your tool guy from Adjustable Clamp Company. Today we're going to talk about miter saws. It was about 10 years ago that about the only thing on the shelf at your hardware store, unless you wanted to spend a lot of money, was that little wooden miter box that you could buy, take it home and use your hand saw with it. Pretty frustrating, not very accurate. Well, today we have a Jorgensen miter saw, our mini miter saw. The model number is 64005, and it is easy to use, it's accurate, and it's not a lot of money. We're only talking 20-25 bucks, and you've got a saw with a great cutting blade, very easy to adjust, a good fence, and I think you're going to like it a lot. So for those molding jobs, the little woodworking jobs around the house, this is a great solution for you. So today we're going to talk about how to set it up and how to get started with the Jorgensen miter saw. Okay, so I've unpacked the saw, and first of all, like always, make sure you've got everything you need. And it's really only 4 things you're looking for: the pivot arm assembly, the hardware pack, the table saw base, and the saw itself with the saw guides on it. That's all you're looking for. And now we'll start to set it up. This is the toughest part of the job, and I think you're going to find it pretty easy to do. The first thing you do on the pivot arm are these 2 pieces of orange plastic. Just pull those off and toss them out, or throw them in a drawer. You're not going to need them again. They're only there for shipping to make sure that these rods don't get bent. So look at the pivot arm, and on the pivot arm is the angle indicator, and that's that orange plastic piece, and it's spring loaded. So I want you to take that angle indicator and pull it back, and then you're going to flip your table over and attach, just line up the holes on the table and the angle and the pivot arm, okay? Just like that. And you'll know that you're in the right position when you can turn the pivot arm and the angle indicator locks into these little notches underneath the table. Now, hold the whole thing together with your hand and flip it over. Make sure you hold it together tight or it's going to fall apart. Take a bolt that you found in your hardware pack and drop it into the top of the table. And you'll see the hex-shaped hole in the top of the table matches that bolt. And just drop it in all the way down until the head of the bolt is flush with the top of the table. Now, again, put your finger on top of the head of that bolt, hold it in place, and flip the whole assembly over again. And again, hold everything in place so that it stays together. Now, you've got a flat washer, a lock washer, and then an acorn nut. And tighten the acorn nut up just by hand until it stops. And you'll see that the acorn nut has a little plastic insert that when you turn it by hand, it'll feel like it wants to stop. Well, that's there so that when we adjust it, it's going to stay where you adjust it to. So I've got an adjustable wrench here, or you can take a box wrench or even a pair of pliers and tighten that up till it's really snug. And we're there. Flip it over, and now we want to test the tension on the pivot arm. You want it snug enough so that it doesn't wobble on the table, but you want it loose enough so that when you pull back the angle indicator and turn it, that it's easy to turn. It should be snug, but not tight to the point where it's uncomfortable to have to adjust it. And so either loosen or tighten that acorn nut, and I got pretty lucky this time. It's just about right. There's no wobble, and it's nice and snug. Okay, your next step is to learn how to mount the saw to the table. And it works great with these vertical posts and the saw guide arms that are built in to the saw. There's 2 of them. And all you do is move those into position approximately the width of the posts apart, and then just drop it down on the posts. How simple is that? And you can see already that you've got a saw attached to the table. It's smooth, it's easy to adjust, works great. Okay, so our next step, for those who are watching carefully, I think you'll already have noticed our next step is to turn the saw blade upside down, or actually turn it right side up. We ship it this way as a safeguard so you don't cut yourself. Those teeth may be small, but they're very, very sharp. So we pack it that way intentionally for your safety. So let's flip it upside down and get it ready to cut. So just pull your saw off the table, move your table out of the way, and you're going to loosen this wing nut on the top of the blade. And this wing nut is how you take the blade, you take the saw apart, how you tension the blade. It's how the whole thing works. It's pretty simple. So I've just loosened that wing nut, and now we can wiggle the blade and take it off of the frame. A little more. There we go. And just remove the blade and flip it upside down into the correct position. Now be careful, again, these teeth are very, very sharp. You want the teeth pointing toward the front of the saw. They definitely have a pitch to them, and you want them pointing toward the front of the saw, so as you cut, you're pushing your wood and your saw into the fence and into your saw base. So my teeth are facing this way toward the front bracket of the blade, or the saw frame. So now we put the blade back into the assembly. Just hook it back onto the little knobs. Make sure the main post is in position, and retighten the wing nut. And just snug it up. Okay? Now, when you're cutting, when you cut, make sure that this wing nut is nice and snug. Do not over tighten it. You don't want to break the saw. Just finger tight is fine, but get it good and snug. You don't want the blade to wobble. But we're ready to go now. Okay, we're almost done. Just a few easy steps, a few little features to point the saw out, and then you'll be ready to cut wood. So first of all, what I want you to do is just pull the saw off the table again, and notice these two little parts here. There's one on the front post and one on the back post. These actually don't even show up on the instruction sheet for some reason. We have to get that fixed, but so you know, these are depth stop guides. And what you can do is to lift them up and tighten them in place. And you tighten them in approximately the same position on the guide bar. Okay, so if I were to lift this up and then lift the second one up and tighten it about in the same position and lock it on the guide rod, now the saw can't drop down and that prevents you from cutting to a certain depth. So honestly, I've never used this function on my saw, but it's there if you want. Let's say that you only wanted to cut halfway through a piece of 3/4 wood and you wanted to do that on 10 different pieces. You can set this depth stop regulators at the height you want, leave it there, and then just cut piece after piece exactly to the same depth. But when you're not using them, just take them, let them fall to the bottom of the guide rod, get them out of the way. You can just leave them there, and that way you can still cut all the way through your piece of wood. Now, the other part in your hardware pack is this clamping assembly. And all you do is take the knob off, and it will slide through the front of your table on either side. and you just put it through the table, all the way through the back, and put the knob on here. And it just acts as a clamp. So when you're cutting wood, you'll clamp your wood in place. It acts as an extra hand and a hold down for when you're clamping wood. And of course, you can use it on this side or on this side of the table. The last little thing to show you is the little rubber feet that come with it. On the bottom of the table, you've got these 4 little rubber pads that came with your saw. Just peel them off the paper and stick them in place. Okay, you're ready to cut wood. That is your Jorgensen Miter Saw ready to go. Just a few more points for you to know before you start using your saw. What I would really like for you to do is to attach your saw to either a piece of wood or use a clamp. Take the base and somehow clamp it down to your work surface. This can tilt back and forth and wobble, and that can be a real pain in the neck when you're trying to cut wood. You don't want to have to concentrate on keeping the base solid. So either screw your saw to your work position or attach it to a piece of plywood or a scrap piece of wood and then clamp that to the table. You want the base of the table clamped down. That'll make your saw a lot nicer to use. The other thing to remember is when you're cutting, you face those saw teeth, so when you're cutting now, you're cutting on the push stroke. When your saw blade is coming toward the fence, you're cutting wood. Use a light, easy stroke. Let the teeth do the cutting. Don't force it. This is not a typical handsaw that you're used to using. A very fine tooth blade that'll cut really nice and smooth, but you have to be patient with it. I think you're going to enjoy your saw. It's a good, inexpensive solution to work around the house. I think you're going to like it. The Jorgensen Miter Saw. This is Jim the Tool Man. Thanks a lot.